200 wedding invitations with my farm's address. 200. And I only found out from the florist who called to coordinate the decorations. Imagine the humiliation. My own son David and his fiancée Jessica had planned their wedding on my property without even asking if it was okay. As if I were invisible. As if my farm were theirs. But that day, as I listened to the florist talk about red roses and ceremony arches, something inside me snapped. I worked for 40 years to buy that land. 40 years as a housekeeper, cleaning other people's homes, enduring humiliations, saving every single penny, and now my own son was treating it as if it were his. I hung up the phone with trembling hands and immediately called the biggest event company in the city. "Are you available on Saturday?" I asked with a smile they couldn't see. "Perfect. I want to rent my farm for an important corporate event." If they wanted to use my property, they were going to find out it had an owner. For 40 years, I got up at 5 in the morning. 40 years cleaning floors that weren't mine, washing other people's clothes, ironing shirts for men who didn't even greet me when I arrived at their homes. 40 years putting up with disrespect from bosses who treated me worse than their dogs, who yelled at me if I broke a cup, who docked my pay if I was 5 minutes late because of public transportation. All for a dream that seemed impossible, to have my own place in the world. My 74-acre farm on the outskirts of town with its white-painted farmhouse, its mango and avocado trees, that wide porch where I planned to spend my golden years drinking coffee in peace, watching my flowers grow, and listening to the birds sing. I remember the day I saw the ad in the newspaper. Farm 74 acres, house included. The price seemed like a distant dream, but something inside me told me it was my chance. I worked double shifts for 5 years. I cleaned houses by day and offices by night. My hands were chapped. My back ached. But every dollar I saved brought me closer to my dream. When I finally bought it at 65 years old, I cried like a child. It was mine. Every brick, every tree, every square foot of blessed earth. I had paid for every last cent, with the sweat of my brow, with tears of exhaustion, with years of my life sacrificed. I held the deed in my trembling hands. My name was right there. Hilda Morales, sole owner. But for my son David and his fiancée Jessica, from day one, it was our family property. As if they had contributed anything more than problems and expenses. They never helped pay a dime for maintenance. They never offered to fix the broken fence or prune the trees. But they showed up every weekend as if they owned the place. They would come over with their friends without warning, have parties late into the night, leave empty bottles all over the house, and expect me to clean up like their personal maid. "Mom, could you make something to eat?" More guests showed up than we expected. Jessica would say to me with that fake smile I so detested as she flopped down on my new hammock like she was the queen of the place. And I, like a fool in love with my children, always obeyed. I cooked for 10, 15 people who didn't even thank me. I cleaned up after their parties, washed their dirty dishes, picked up their messes, always swallowing my pride, thinking it was a matter of family love, that this was how bonds were built. How naive I was all these years. How blind I was not to see how they were systematically using me. That Tuesday morning, I was watering my tomato plants, enjoying the morning silence, when the phone rang for the first time. It was a man with a professional and friendly voice asking me about the specific details of the event on Saturday. "What event?" I asked, completely confused, with the host still in my hands. "The wedding of Mr. and Mrs. David and Jessica," he replied with complete ease. "We have your address as the ceremony location and need to coordinate the delivery of the round tables, chairs, tablecloths, and the floral arch for 200 confirmed guests." I felt as if I had been doused with ice water. My legs trembled violently, and I had to sit down on the porch step before I fell. My heart was pounding so hard I thought I was going to have a heart attack right then and there. "There must be a mistake," I muttered, my voice broken. But in the depths of my soul, I knew there wasn't. That was only the first call of a nightmare that was just beginning. Throughout that week, the calls kept coming like daggers straight to the heart. The caterer asking about the 3-course menu they had requested. the DJ consulting about the sound system and the romantic playlist, the photography company confirming the times for family photos. Everyone, absolutely everyone, had the same information saved in their schedules. My address, my farm, my property as the setting for a wedding I didn't even know existed. With every phone call, my heart broke a little more, and anger grew like fire in my veins. How dare they do this? How could they plan the most important day of their lives on my sacred land without consulting me? As if I were an old piece of furniture. As if my opinion was worth absolutely nothing in this world. On Wednesday afternoon, when I couldn't take the anguish anymore, I decided to confront my son. I called David with my hands trembling with indignation. "Son, I need to talk to you urgently," I said, trying to keep the calm in my shaky voice. "What's wrong, Mom?" "I'm busy at work," he replied with that cold, distant tone he always used with me, as if talking to his mother was a gigantic nuisance in his perfect day. "It's about your wedding," I managed to say. There was a long silence on the other end of the line, a silence that confirmed all my most terrible suspicions. "What does my wedding have to do with you?" he finally asked with a coldness that froze my blood. "David, all the vendors are calling me. You have my farm listed as the ceremony location." His response completely shattered me. "Oh, Mom, I forgot to mention it to you, but don't worry. It's not going to cost you anything. We're paying for everything. We just need you to have the house ready on Saturday and prepare some food for the family that stays after the party. We just need." As if it were that easy. As if my farm were a free party hall with a housekeeper included. I was speechless with shock, the phone glued to my ear, listening to my own heart break into 1,000 pieces. 40 years of sacrifice summed up, and I forgot to mention it to you. 200 guests, David. I managed to whisper. "Mom, don't exaggerate. It'll be like 150 people max. And look on the bright side. You'll get to meet all of Jessica's family that you've never seen." The bright side. As if it were a privilege for strangers to trample my lawn. As if it were a blessing for strangers to use my bathrooms. As if it were a fortune for my house to be filled with people who didn't even know my name. "What if I have other plans for that day?" I asked, my voice a thread. "What plans are you going to have, Mom? Your life is very quiet. Besides, this is important for us. It's our special day. Our special day on my private property. Without my consent, without my participation in the decision." I hung up the phone without saying goodbye. The tears ran down my wrinkled cheeks. But they weren't tears of sadness. They were tears of an anger so profound it burned inside me like volcanic lava. They had crossed a line with no return. They had disrespected me in the cruelest way possible. But as I sat crying in my kitchen, surrounded by the silence of my violated home, an idea began to form in my mind. An idea that made me smile through the tears. An idea that was going to teach them once and for all who the real owner of this property was. Early Thursday, I dialed the number for Henry Smith, the owner of Premium Corporate Events, the most exclusive and expensive event planning company in the whole city. "Good morning, ma'am. How can we help you?" He replied with that professional courtesy they only use with clients who pay. "Well," I said, "I want to rent my farm for a corporate event this Saturday." I said with a confidence I didn't know I had. "It's urgent, but I'll pay whatever it takes." There was a moment of surprise on the other end. "This Saturday is very short notice. Mom, our corporate events require weeks of planning." "I'll pay double your normal fee," I interrupted. "It's a 74-acre completely private farm with a colonial house, spacious gardens, and parking for 100 cars. Perfect for an important executive meeting." I could hear how his tone of voice changed. Money always speaks louder than excuses. "Could you give me more details about the event, Mrs. Morales?" "The event is a corporate celebration for international executives. I need maximum privacy and security. No external interruptions." I lied with a naturalness that surprised myself. "Perfect. Mrs. Morales, could we visit you this afternoon to see the space and sign the contract?" "Of course. And Henry, one more thing. I need you to arrive at exactly 2 o'clock on Saturday afternoon to begin the setup. Punctuality is essential. No problem at all, ma'am. It will be a pleasure to work with you. I hung up the phone, and for the first time in weeks, I felt powerful. For the first time in years, I felt like the owner of my own destiny. They were going to learn in the most humiliating way possible that this farm had a name and a last name. Hilda Morales. I spent the rest of the day cleaning every corner of the house with an energy I hadn't felt in decades. I pruned the roses in the garden, swept the porch, polished the floors until they shone like mirrors. If I was going to receive Henry to show him my property, I wanted him to see exactly how beautiful and valuable my farm was. When Henry arrived that afternoon with his assistant, he couldn't hide his admiration. "Mrs. Morales, this place is absolutely spectacular," he said as we walked through the gardens. "How long have you lived here?" 5 years, I replied proudly. "I worked for 40 years to be able to buy it. It's my most precious treasure." His eyes lit up when he saw the real dimensions of the land, the well-maintained house, the absolute privacy. "This is worth a lot more than you think," he commented in a low voice. "You could make a fortune renting it for exclusive events." A fortune? That word was engraved in my mind like fire. We signed the contract that same afternoon. $5,000 for 1 day's rental. $5,000 that my son and daughter-in-law had never offered to help me with maintenance expenses, but which a private company paid without batting an eye to have access to my property for a few hours. That night, I slept better than I had in months. I finally had control of the situation. I was finally going to show them who was in charge of this house. But what I didn't know was that this was only the beginning of a war they themselves had declared. On Friday morning, I woke up with a strange feeling in my chest. It wasn't fear or anxiety. It was something completely different. It was power. For the first time in 5 years since I bought the farm, for the first time in decades of being treated as a housekeeper by my own family, I had absolute control of the situation. And that feeling was intoxicating, like the best wine in the world. I made myself a strong coffee and sat on the porch to contemplate my kingdom, because that was exactly what it was. My kingdom, my empire, my little piece of heaven that I had fought for with blood and tears. The mango trees swayed gently in the morning breeze. The flowers I had planted with my own hands filled the air with a sweet scent. And the silence was so absolute I could hear the beat of my own vengeful heart. But the peace didn't last long. At 9 o'clock, the phone rang with the insistence of an emergency alarm. It was Jessica. And from the first second, I knew something was wrong from the hysterical tone of her voice. "Hilda, I need to talk to you urgently," she screamed without even greeting me. "What's wrong, Jessica?" I asked with a calm I didn't feel inside. "The florist just called me. He says he can't get into the farm tomorrow because there's another event scheduled. He says someone else rented the place for the same day." Her voice cracked between desperation and fury. "That must be a mistake, Jessica. They probably got the address confused." "It's not a mistake, Hilda. The caterer and the sound company called, too. They all say the same thing, that there's a corporate event scheduled from 2 o'clock in the afternoon." I could perfectly imagine her panicked face, her wide eyes, her pale skin from the shock. "How is it possible that you don't know anything about this? It's your farm." "Exactly, Jessica. It's my farm. You're finally understanding. It must be a terrible misunderstanding," I replied with the most innocent voice I could muster. "Have you talked to David? Maybe he knows something." "Of course I talked to him. He's on his way. We're going to get there in an hour to clear up this mess." I hung up the phone and laughed alone in my kitchen. I laughed heartily, with years of humiliations pouring out of my throat in the form of liberating laughter. It occurred to me that I should be nervous, that I should be worried about the confrontation that was coming, but I didn't feel any of that. I only felt a deep and delicious satisfaction. An hour later, I saw David's car kicking up dust on the driveway. Both of them came, my son and my daughter-in-law, with the most serious faces I had ever seen on them. David walked towards the house with long determined strides like a general going to reconquer lost territory. Jessica followed him with her heels sinking into the dirt of my garden. "Mom, what the hell is going on here?" David asked me without even greeting me, walking into my house as if it were his. "I don't understand what you mean, son. Don't act like you don't know. All the vendors say there's another event tomorrow, a corporate event that's preventing them from doing our wedding." I stared at him, studying his gestures of desperation. It was the first time in years that I had seen him genuinely concerned about something I could control. It was the first time he needed something from me beyond free food and housekeeping services. "Oh yes," I finally said with the most natural voice in the world. "It's true. I rented the farm for tomorrow." The silence that followed was so thick you could cut it with a knife. David and Jessica stared at me as if I had confessed to a murder. Their mouths opened at the same time. Their eyes filled with absolute disbelief. "What did you say?" Jessica whispered in a voice that seemed to come from beyond the grave. "That I rented my farm for a corporate event tomorrow, Saturday," I repeated with a smile I couldn't hold back. "A very important company offered me a considerable sum to use the place, and I accepted." "But our wedding is tomorrow," David yelled, his face red with fury. "We sent out 200 invitations. People have already RSVP'd." "Well, you should have consulted me before sending out invitations with my address on them," I replied with a calmness that surprised me. "This is my property, David. Not yours, not Jessica's, not my family's. And I decide what happens here and when." Jessica approached me with eyes full of angry tears. "Hilda, you can't do this to us. It's our most important day. We've been planning this wedding for months." "We've been planning," she says. I repeated her words with sarcasm. "And at what point in those months did it occur to you to ask me if I agreed?" "But you're his mother," she yelled, pointing her finger at me as if I were a criminal. "A mother is supposed to support her son on his wedding day. A son is supposed to respect his mother and not use her property as if it were his own," I retorted, getting up from the chair. David paced my living room like a caged lion. "This is ridiculous. Cancel that corporate event. Tell them there was a mistake, that the place was already booked." "I'm not going to cancel anything, David. I signed a legal contract and they paid me in advance. $5,000, just so you know." $5,000, Jessica exclaimed, her eyes wide. "We'll pay you that and more to cancel the event." There it was, the desperate offer. The moment they finally recognized that my property had value, that my decision had weight, that I had power over something they needed. "This isn't about money, Jessica," I said, looking her directly in the eyes. "It's about respect, about consideration, about asking me before you decide for me." Okay, David yelled, exasperated. "We made a mistake. We should have consulted you, but now we need you to help us. We're family." Family? That word they always used when they needed something from me. That magic word that was supposed to erase all the humiliations, all the disrespect, all the times they had treated me like a housekeeper in my own house. Family. I repeated slowly. The same family that shows up at my house without warning. The same family that has parties on my property without asking. The same family that sent out 200 invitations with my address without consulting me if I agreed. Jessica began to cry with real tears of desperation. "Please, Hilda, I'm begging you. Cancel that event. We'll do whatever you want. We'll pay you monthly rent for the farm. We'll help you with expenses, whatever it takes. But please don't ruin our special day." For a moment, seeing her tears, feeling the genuine desperation in her voice, I was about to give in. For a moment, the loving mother I had been all my life wanted to come out and rescue her son from this disaster. But then I remembered the exact words David had said to me on the phone. "I forgot to mention it to you, but don't worry, it's not going to cost you anything." I forgot. As if it were a minor detail. As if my life, my property, my feelings were so insignificant they could be forgotten without consequences. "It's too late," I finally told them. The corporate event is tomorrow at 2 o'clock in the afternoon. You'll have to find another place for your wedding." And without saying another word, I walked out of the house and went to the garden, leaving them alone with their desperation and disbelief. But this was just the beginning of the lesson they had to learn. I left them in the living room screaming like angry children while I watered my plants with the tranquility of a nun in prayer. I could hear their desperate voices filtering through the open windows. "It's revenge," Jessica yelled. "She's crazy," David replied. "We have to do something. Let's call a lawyer. This can't be legal." But no matter how much they screamed, no matter how much they threatened, I knew something they didn't. I had every right to win. This was my farm, bought with my money, with the deed in my name. I could do with it exactly what I wanted. And what I wanted was to teach them the most expensive lesson of their lives. When they finally left the house, David's face was purple with rage. "This isn't over, Mom," he yelled from the car. "We're going to find a way to fix this mess you caused." "Caused?" I said. "I caused the mess by defending my property. They didn't cause anything by using it without permission." "And you better hope those corporate people don't show up tomorrow," Jessica threatened, sticking her head out the window. "Because if you ruin our special day, I swear you'll never see your grandchildren again." The grandchildren, the final card, the lowest emotional blackmail they could use. But not even that hurt me anymore. Not even that scared me. They drove away, kicking up a cloud of dust that dirted my freshly watered flowers. I watched them go down the dirt road until they disappeared completely. And then I sat on the porch and cried. But I didn't cry from sadness. I cried from relief, from liberation, from a strange happiness I hadn't felt in decades. Decades. That night, I couldn't sleep for a minute. Not because of nerves or regret, but because of a feeling similar to what a child feels the night before Christmas. I spent the time walking around the house, checking every detail, imagining the faces of David and Jessica when they arrived tomorrow with their 200 guests, and found that my farm was occupied by executives in elegant suits. At 6 o'clock on Saturday morning, I got up and took the longest bath of my life. I put on my most elegant wine-colored dress, the one I had bought for special occasions, but had never had the chance to wear. I carefully styled my hair, put on a little makeup, and even wore the pearl earrings that had been my mother's, because today I was not going to be the same humiliated housekeeper. Today, I was going to be Hilda Morales, sole owner and absolute lady of these 74 acres of blessed land. At 8, the phone rang. It was my neighbor Irene, worried about the rumors that were spreading through the town like wildfire. "Hilda, my love, is it true you canceled David's wedding?" "I didn't cancel anything, Irene. I simply rented my farm for another event." "Oh my God. But don't you feel bad for all the people who have already confirmed?" "Feel bad?" Everyone was talking about the shame I should feel. No one was talking about the shame they should have felt for using my property without consulting me. They should feel bad for disrespecting their mother. I replied with a firmness that surprised me. "But everyone in town already knows about the wedding, Hilda. People bought gifts, took the day off. Some people even asked for time off from work to go." Every word from Irene was like a dagger to my resolve, because she was right. There were innocent people who were going to be affected by my decision. For a moment, I hesitated. For a moment, I thought about calling Henry and canceling the corporate event. But then I remembered something I had forgotten in the midst of all the crisis. For 5 years since I bought the farm, David and Jessica had done the exact same thing. They had invited people without consulting me, had parties without telling me, had used my property as their private backyard. "Irene," I said with a certainty that came from the depths of my soul, "for 5 years I've been the uninvited hostess of my son's parties. For 5 years I've cooked for his friends. I've cleaned up after their celebrations. I've been treated like a housekeeper in my own house. Today, for the first time, I'm going to be the owner of my own place." At 10 o'clock in the morning, the first wedding vendors started to arrive. The florist showed up with his truck full of red roses and white carnations. But when he saw the private corporate event signs that Henry had put up early, he stood at the entrance, not knowing what to do. I was on the porch having my morning coffee, watching the first act of the drama I had orchestrated unfold. The florist saw me and walked towards me with a look of total confusion. "Ma'am, I'm here for the decoration of Mr. and Mrs. David and Jessica's wedding, but I see there's another event." "Indeed," I replied with the calmest voice in the world. "Today, I have a corporate event scheduled from 2 o'clock in the afternoon. The farm is not available for the wedding." "But ma'am, I have a signed contract. They're going to pay me $3,000 for this decoration." $3,000 just for flowers for a wedding they planned without consulting me on a farm that wasn't theirs, with money they had never offered to help me with the upkeep of the place. "I'm very sorry, but you'll have to talk to the contracting parties. I didn't sign any contract for the wedding." The caterer arrived with 2 trucks full of elegant food. The sound company arrived with giant speakers. The photographer arrived with his professional cameras. One after another, all the vendors found out the same reality. The farm was occupied by another event, and the wedding would have to find another place. At 11:30, Henry arrived with his premium corporate events team. 25 people dressed in black, moving with the precision of a symphony orchestra. In 1 hour, they transformed my garden into an elegant outdoor ballroom with round tables, white tablecloths, sophisticated centerpieces, and a stage for corporate presentations. "Mrs. Morales," Henry said to me, admiring the result, "your farm is perfect for this type of event. If you're interested, we could set up a monthly contract. We have clients who would pay very well for a place this exclusive." A monthly contract, regular income, financial independence. For the first time in my life, my farm was not only my home, but also my source of income. At 12 o'clock, the wedding guests began to arrive. Elegant cars, entire families dressed up, women in party dresses and men in dark suits, all following the directions on the invitations that led them directly to my main entrance. And I was there on my porch, dressed like a queen, watching as each car stopped, confused by the corporate event signs. Watching as the families got out of the cars and looked around without understanding what was happening. Watching as little by little a crowd of lost guests formed at the entrance to my farm. Some approached me to ask, "Excuse me, ma'am, do you know where David and Jessica's wedding is?" "I'm afraid it can't be held here today," I replied courteously. "The farm is rented for a corporate event." The confused faces turned to surprise, then to indignation. "But how is that possible? We received the invitation with this address." "You'll have to talk to the bride and groom. I'm just the owner of the place." At 2 o'clock, the executives for the corporate event arrived. 50 impeccably dressed men and women in new cars, treating me with the respect and courtesy that a successful businesswoman deserves. "Mrs. Morales, thank you so much for allowing us to use your beautiful property," the CEO told me, shaking my hand with genuine admiration. And while the executives enjoyed their elegant meeting in my perfectly decorated garden, I sat on my porch to await the moment I had been imagining all week. The moment David and Jessica would arrive in their wedding attire and find out that they could no longer dispose of my life as they pleased. At 2:30 in the afternoon, just as the executives were starting their corporate presentation in my garden, I saw a caravan of white cars decorated with silver ribbons appearing on the dirt road. My heart sped up like a war drum. It was the wedding party, the main car with the bride and groom, followed by the groomsmen, bridesmaids, and several close family members. From my privileged porch, I could perfectly see the scene unfolding like a dramatic play. David's car stopped at the main entrance, and he got out first, looking very elegant in his black tuxedo, but with a panicked look that brutally contrasted with his formal attire. Jessica got out after him. And I must admit, she looked beautiful in her ivory wedding dress, with that endless train and that veil that had cost more than I earned in 3 months when I was a housekeeper. But her beauty completely vanished in the face of the absolute horror she had on her face when she saw the reality of my garden. "This can't be happening," Jessica screamed with a desperation that was heard above the corporate murmur. "This is our day. This is our wedding." But her screams were lost in the air because the executives were completely focused on their event, oblivious to the matrimonial drama unfolding a few feet away. David ran towards the house like a man possessed, the tails of his tuxedo flying behind him. Mom, get out here immediately," he yelled from the foot of the porch with a fury I had never seen in him. "You have to stop this right now. You have to kick these people out of here." I slowly got up from my rocking chair, smoothed out my wine-colored dress, and walked to the porch railing with the dignity of a queen receiving her rebellious subjects. "Good afternoon, David. You look very elegant in that tuxedo." "This is no time for jokes, Mom. There are 100 guests waiting outside. The church already confirmed they can't change the ceremony to another location. Jessica's whole family traveled from out of town." "What a shame," I replied with a tranquility that infuriated him even more. "You should have thought about all that before using my property without my consent. Mom, please, I'm begging you. Cancel that corporate event. Tell them there was a family emergency." Jessica ran over with her wedding dress lifted so she wouldn't trip, with real tears running down her perfectly made-up cheeks. "Hilda, please. I'll give you $10,000 right now. $20,000. Whatever you want, but help us." $20,000. 4 times more than the corporate company was paying me. 4 times more than they had ever offered to help me with the upkeep of the farm. Money that appeared magically only when they needed me desperately. $20,000, Jessica. I repeated slowly. "Where are you going to get $20,000 right now?" "From our savings for the honeymoon. From the money we had for the down payment on the new house." "I don't care. Just help us." It was fascinating to see how the money they had never had to treat me as the owner of the house appeared instantly when they needed me as a wedding savior. "The problem isn't the money," I told them with a firmness that surprised me. "The problem is that I signed a legal contract. Those executives paid me in advance and trusted my word." "To hell with your word," David exploded, completely losing his composure. "We're your family. We should be your priority." Family. That magic word they used when they wanted to manipulate my feelings. That word that was supposed to erase 40 years of ignored sacrifices. Family. I repeated with a smile I couldn't control. The same family that for 5 years has used my farm as their personal backyard. The same family that has never asked me if I agree with their plans. "But this is different, Mom. This is our wedding. It's the most important day of our lives. And my farm is the most important achievement of my life," I replied, walking down the porch steps one by one. "For 40 years I worked to buy it. 40 years cleaning other people's homes, enduring humiliations, saving penny after penny, and you've treated it as if it were yours." Just then, Henry, the corporate event planner, arrived, walking elegantly towards us with a professional smile. "Mrs. Morales, I apologize for the interruption, but we wanted to thank you personally for this extraordinary place. The executives are delighted with the privacy and beauty of the setting." David looked at him as if he were the devil himself. "You have to get out of here immediately. This place is reserved for our wedding." Henry looked at me confused, waiting for my explanation. "Henry, this is my son and my daughter-in-law. It seems there was a misunderstanding with the dates." "A misunderstanding?" Jessica yelled, her voice breaking. "It was no misunderstanding. She rented the farm knowing perfectly well that it was our wedding day." Henry frowned, beginning to understand the family situation unfolding in front of his professional eyes. "Mrs. Morales," he said with all the diplomacy possible, "if there is a family conflict, we could consider moving our event to—" "There is no conflict," I interrupted him firmly. "You have a signed and paid contract. Your event continues exactly as planned." Henry's face showed respect and admiration. In the business world, a given word and a signed contract were sacred. "Perfect, Mrs. Morales. It's a pleasure to do business with such a professional person." And he walked away back to his event, leaving us alone with the family tension that cut the air like a knife. David stared at me with a mixture of disbelief, and something that looked dangerously like fear. For the first time in his life, he was seeing his mother as something more than the family's housekeeper. For the first time, he was understanding that I had power, my own will, and the ability to say no. "What are we going to do with all the guests?" Jessica asked in a broken whisper. "What are we going to tell them? How are we going to explain that Grandma canceled the wedding?" "I didn't cancel anything," I clarified for the umpteenth time. "You organized a wedding on someone else's property without consulting the owner." At that moment, more guests' cars began to arrive. Entire families getting out confused. Children dressed up running around the parking lot. Grandparents with canes wondering where the ceremony was. The chaos multiplied exponentially with every minute that passed. And I was right there in the eye of the hurricane, feeling more powerful and more in control of my destiny than I had ever felt in my 70 years of life. But what David and Jessica didn't know was that this was just the beginning of the lesson they had to learn about respect, consideration, and the consequences of treating their mother like a housekeeper. The situation became more chaotic with every passing minute. The wedding guests crowded at the entrance to my farm like a confused mob, some indignant, others worried, all without understanding what the hell was going on with the ceremony they had come to witness. Voices were raised in Spanish, English, and even Italian, because Jessica's family was international, and people had traveled thousands of miles to be present on this special day. "But where is the wedding?" asked an older lady with an Italian accent, dressed in a very elegant pink suit. "Why are there businessmen where the altar should be?" A group of David's cousins argued among themselves, some blaming the bride and groom for the disorganization, others trying to find logical explanations for the inexplicable. Jessica ran from group to group like a chicken with its head cut off, trying to explain the inexplicable with her wedding dress dragging in the dirt of my garden. "It's a horrible misunderstanding," she would say, her voice breaking. "My mother-in-law had a problem with the dates. We're trying to fix it." But each explanation sounded more desperate than the last. David, for his part, had completely lost the elegant composure a groom is supposed to have on his wedding day. His hair was messy, his tie was crooked, and he paced back and forth like a caged lion, talking on the phone with a desperation that was pitiful. "I need a place for 200 guests now. I don't care about the price. It's a family emergency." But it was Saturday afternoon, and all the event halls, hotels, and elegant restaurants already had their own celebration scheduled. No one could accommodate 200 guests at the last minute, especially not for a complete ceremony with decorations, sound, and catering. Meanwhile, I remained on my porch as a privileged spectator of the most satisfying play of my life. The executives of the corporate event continued with their meeting, completely oblivious to the family drama unfolding a few feet away, focused on their business presentations and professional networking. From time to time, a wedding guest would approach me directly to ask what was happening. "Excuse me, ma'am. Do you know where the ceremony will be held?" "I'm afraid you'll have to ask the bride and groom." I would reply with the most polite courtesy. "I am only the owner of the farm, and today it is rented for a corporate event." The look of confusion on each person's face was a masterpiece. They didn't understand how the groom's grandmother could not know anything about her own son's wedding. They didn't understand how it was possible that there was another event in the same place and on the same date. They didn't understand anything. And that confusion was exactly what I had planned. At 3:30 in the afternoon, Father Thomas, the priest who was going to officiate the ceremony, arrived. He was an older man, about 60, with that infinite patience that priests develop after decades of dealing with family dramas. He got out of his black car, saw the chaos, approached David directly, and put a hand on his shoulder. "Son, explain to me what's going on here." David completely broke down in the presence of Father Thomas. It was as if the figure of religious authority made him revert to the Catholic boy he had been, the boy who didn't dare to lie in confession. "Father, my mom rented the farm for another event. We didn't know. We didn't ask her." Father Thomas looked at me with those wise eyes that have seen everything in life. He walked slowly to my porch, went up the stairs, and sat in the rocking chair next to mine. Hilda, right? I'm Father Thomas. Can we talk for a moment? Of course, Father. I liked his approach. He didn't come in yelling or demanding like David and Jessica. He didn't try to manipulate me emotionally. He simply wanted to understand the situation from my perspective. Tell me what happened here, he said with that quiet voice that confessors use. I explained everything to him from the beginning. The 40 years of work, the 5 years of being treated like a housekeeper on my own farm, the parties without invitation, the wedding planned without consulting me, the 200 invitations sent out with my address without my knowledge. I told him everything with the honesty owed to a man of God. Father Thomas listened in silence, nodding from time to time, without judging them or me. When I finished talking, he remained silent for several minutes, looking at the garden where the executives were enjoying their corporate event, while the wedding guests remained confused in the parking lot. I understand your pain, Hilda, he finally told me. And I understand that you feel disrespected. But I also understand that there are 200 innocent people who came with the best intention of celebrating your son's love. Father, I didn't create this situation. I only defended my property. I know, my dear, and you have every right to defend what is yours. But now we have to think about how to solve this in the most Christian way possible. I liked that he didn't judge me, but I also didn't like the implication that I had to be the one to solve the problem that others had created. What do you suggest, Father? Well, the corporate event is already set up, and you have a legal contract. We can't interrupt that, but perhaps we could use the area in front of the house for a small ceremony, just with the closest family, and then find a restaurant for the celebration. It was a reasonable proposal, I must admit, but there was a problem. Accepting that proposal would mean rescuing David and Jessica from the consequences of their own decisions. It would mean teaching them that they could disrespect their mother, because in the end, she would always rescue them. Father, I said, looking him directly in the eyes, for 5 years, I've rescued my son from the consequences of his decisions. I've cleaned up after his parties. I've cooked for his friends. I've allowed him to treat my house as if it were his. And every time I rescue him, he learns that he can do whatever he wants because Mom will always be there to fix the mess. Father Thomas nodded slowly. He was a wise man and perfectly understood the moral dilemma I was facing. And what do you think should happen now? I think my son needs to learn that decisions have consequences, that he can't use other people's property without permission, not even if that person is his mother. At that moment, Jessica ran towards the porch with her wedding dress dirty from the dirt and tears running down her cheeks. Father Thomas, thank God you're here. Please help us. Hilda has to understand that this is our special day. The father looked at her with compassion, but also with that firmness that characterizes good priests. Jessica, my dear, before we talk about special days, we need to talk about respect and consideration for others. It is true that you planned this wedding without consulting Mrs. Hilda. Jessica fell silent with her mouth open, not knowing what to say, because the truth was indefensible, and she knew it. It's just that we thought she was family. We didn't think it was necessary. You didn't think it was necessary to ask the owner if you could use her property. The priest insisted with that infinite patience that disarms more than any shouting. But we've always used the farm for our celebrations, Jessica exclaimed desperately. There's never been a problem before. That's the problem, my dear, Father Thomas replied. The fact that there's never been a problem doesn't mean there hasn't been a lack of respect. And at that moment, seeing Jessica's face confronting the truth in front of a man of God, I knew that someone else finally understood my point of view. Someone else saw what I had been feeling for 5 years, being treated like a housekeeper in my own house. But the lesson was just beginning. Father Thomas stayed with us for a whole hour, mediating between the desperation of the bride and groom and my unshakable determination. It was like a spiritual referee in the strangest ring in the world. A 70-year-old grandmother against her own son on his wedding day. But while we were talking, something incredible began to happen. The executives from the corporate event began to notice the drama unfolding a few feet from their professional meeting. At first, they tried to politely ignore it, but it was impossible not to see a bride in a white dress crying uncontrollably while 200 confused guests filled the parking lot of my farm. Henry, the event planner, discreetly approached where we were. "Mrs. Morales, I apologize for the interruption again, but my clients are asking if they can help in any way. They see the family situation and feel bad about occupying the place on such an important day." For the first time since all this chaos began, I felt a pang of something akin to regret. These elegant professional executives were showing more consideration for an unknown family than my own son had shown towards me for 5 years. "It's very kind of you, Henry, but you have a paid and planned event. You shouldn't worry about our family matters." "Well, if you change your mind, we'll be here until 6 o'clock this evening. After that, the place is completely free." 6 o'clock this evening. That meant they could technically have some kind of nocturnal celebration after the executives left. It was a possibility I hadn't considered, and I saw Jessica's eyes light up with desperate hope when she heard those words. "Did you hear that, Hilda?" she asked me, her voice broken but hopeful. "We could have the ceremony after 6. We could have a candlelit evening wedding. It would be even more romantic." "Jessica," I replied gently, "the problem isn't the schedule. The problem is that you never asked me for permission to use my property." David then approached, and for the first time since this whole crisis began, he didn't have a look of fury on his face, but of something that looked dangerously like humility. "Mom," he said in a voice I hadn't heard since he was a child, "you're right. We made a horrible mistake. We disrespected you in the worst way possible." I remained silent, waiting to see if there was more than a superficial apology dictated by desperation. "We should never have taken it for granted that we could use your farm without asking. We should never have sent out invitations with your address without consulting you. And we should never have treated you as if you were our employee instead of treating you as the owner of the house you are." His words sounded sincere, but I had heard apologies before. Whenever he needed something from me, David knew exactly what to say to soften my mother's heart. "And what will you do differently if I give you another chance?" I asked him directly. "We'll pay you monthly rent for using the farm on weekends," he replied immediately. "We'll consult you before making any plans that involve your property, and we'll treat you with the respect you deserve as our mother and as the owner of this house." Monthly rent, prior consultations, respect as the owner of the house. All the things I had wanted for 5 years, and which appeared magically only when they needed me desperately. "How much monthly rent?" I asked, more out of curiosity than real interest. $1,000 a month, he replied without hesitation. "And we'd take care of all the maintenance expenses, gardening, repairs, utilities whenever we're here." $1,000 a month plus expenses, $12,000 a year that they had never offered before that appeared as if by magic when they needed me. Jessica then approached and knelt in front of my rocking chair with her wedding dress spread over the porch planks like a white cloud. "Hilda, please, I swear to God, we will never disrespect you again. I swear you'll be treated like the queen of this house as you deserve to be treated." Treated? It was a powerful image. The daughter-in-law who had treated me like a housekeeper for 5 years, kneeling in front of me in her wedding dress, begging for forgiveness. It was the validation I had been waiting for decades without even knowing it. But I also knew something they didn't. Promises made in moments of desperation are rarely kept when the crisis passes. The $1,000 a month would become, "This month is tough, Mom." The prior consultations would become, "We forgot to mention it to you." The respect as queen of the house would become, "Mom, could you make something to eat?" "Get up, Jessica," I told her gently. "You don't need to kneel in front of me. You just need to respect me." She got up with tears of hope running down her cheeks. "Does that mean you're going to help us?" At that moment, I looked around my farm. The distinguished executives enjoying their professional event. The 200 wedding guests waiting for some solution in the parking lot. My son and daughter-in-law in their formal wear, humiliated, but finally understanding the value of my property in my opinion. And for the first time in 5 years, maybe for the first time in my life, I had all the power in the situation. I decided what happened next. I was the absolute owner of my destiny, and the destiny of everyone else in that moment. Father Thomas looked at me with those wise eyes that have seen thousands of family dramas. What does your heart say, Hilda? My heart says many different things, Father. It says that I love my son and want to see him happy, but it also says that I'm tired of being treated like a housekeeper in my own house. And both things can be true at the same time, he replied with that wisdom that only comes from years of counseling broken families. The question is, how do you find the balance between love and respect? It was the million-dollar question, literally, because there were dollars a month waiting for my answer. There was a whole wedding waiting for my decision. There were 200 people waiting to know if they were going to witness a ceremony or a family disaster. And while everyone waited for my answer, a completely new idea began to form in my mind. An idea that no one had considered, not even myself until that moment. An idea that would change everything forever. The idea that formed in my mind was so simple and so perfect that I was surprised I hadn't thought of it before. I slowly got up from my rocking chair, walked to the edge of the porch, and looked at everyone waiting for my decision. David in his wrinkled tuxedo, Jessica with her wedding dress dirty from the dirt, Father Thomas with his infinite patience, the 200 confused guests, and the executives who were trying to focus on their meeting despite the family drama. You're right, I finally said in a voice that sounded stronger than I expected. There are 200 innocent people who came with good intentions to celebrate your love. And it's true that they deserve to witness a ceremony, not a family disaster. Jessica's eyes shone with renewed hope. Does that mean you're going to help us? It means I'm going to do something better than help you. I replied with a smile that came from my soul. I'm going to teach you how to organize an event the right way. I walked over to where Henry was, who was observing everything with the professional fascination of someone who handles event crises daily. Henry, how much time would your clients need to finish their meeting if we offered them incentives to speed up the process? Henry looked at me with genuine surprise. What kind of incentives, Mrs. Morales? A 50% discount on the rental, and an invitation to stay and witness a very exclusive improvised wedding. Henry's face lit up as if he had discovered gold. Mrs. Morales, that would be extraordinary for my company. A corporate event followed immediately by an intimate wedding would be the kind of versatility that would put us on the business map. How much time do you need? With those incentives, they could finish by 4:30. I turned to David and Jessica, who were looking at me without completely understanding what I was planning. Here's my proposal. I told them with the authority of someone who has finally taken control of their own life. The religious ceremony will be held here on my farm after 4:30 in the afternoon. Thank you, Mom. Thank you. Thank you, David shouted, trying to hug me, but I raised my hand to stop him. I'm not finished. The ceremony will be held under my conditions, with my rules, and in the way I deem appropriate. The silence that followed was so dense you could cut it with scissors. Everyone knew I was about to dictate terms, and no one knew if those terms would be acceptable or unacceptable. What are your conditions, Mom? David asked with a mixture of gratitude and nervousness. First condition, from this moment on and forever, any event you want to hold on my property must be consulted with me at least 1 month in advance. Second condition, you will pay $1,000 a month in rent for the use of the farm on weekends, plus all maintenance expenses. So far, everything was in line with what they had promised in their desperation. Third condition, during today's ceremony, I will be publicly recognized as the owner and hostess of this place. Fourth condition, after the ceremony, all the guests will know the complete story of how this wedding was organized. I watched as David and Jessica's faces gradually changed from hope to concern. What do you mean by they will know the complete story? Jessica asked in a small voice. I mean that during the toast I am going to explain exactly how we got to this situation. how 200 invitations were sent out without consulting the owner of the property, how a complete wedding was planned without my knowledge, and how everything was almost canceled because no one thought it was necessary to ask me for permission. The look of absolute horror on their faces was almost comical. It was obvious they would prefer any punishment to public humiliation in front of all their family and friends. "Mom, you can't do that to us," David murmured. "Jessica's family, our friends, everyone is going to think we're disrespectful." "And weren't you?" I asked with a devastating simplicity. "Weren't you disrespectful by using my property without my consent? Am I not the one who should feel humiliated for being treated like a housekeeper in my own house?" Father Thomas cleared his throat. "Hilda, I understand your point, but public humiliation can permanently damage family relationships." "Father, with all due respect," I replied, looking him directly in the eyes, "disrespect towards parents also permanently damages family relationships. The difference is that my humiliation has been private for 5 years, while theirs would be public for 5 minutes." It was an unassailable logic, and Father Thomas knew it. He nodded slowly, acknowledging that I had a valid point. "What if we accept all your conditions?" Jessica asked, her voice breaking. "Including the public toast?" Jessica and David looked at each other with that silent communication that couples have when they face difficult decisions. I could see them calculating mentally. It was better to have a wedding with public humiliation, or to have no wedding at all. "Is there no way to negotiate the toast part?" David asked desperately. "We could do everything else. Pay the rent, always consult you, recognize you as the hostess, but avoid the public speech." "No," I replied with a firmness that surprised me. "You either accept all my conditions, or you can find another place for your ceremony." It was the moment of truth. The moment they had to decide if their pride was more important than their wedding. The moment they had to choose between temporary humiliation and the complete loss of their special day. Jessica was the first to break. Tears began to roll down her cheeks as she nodded slowly. "Okay," she whispered. "We accept all your conditions, all of them, including the toast." David looked at her in surprise, then looked at me, and finally he also nodded. "Okay, Mom, we accept." At that moment, I felt something I had never felt in my life. Absolute power mixed with poetic justice. It wasn't cruel revenge. It wasn't gratuitous malice. It was simply the natural consequences of their own decisions presented in a way that everyone could learn the lesson. "Perfect," I told them with a smile that came from the depths of my satisfaction. "Henry, please proceed to talk to your clients about speeding up the event. Father Thomas, we'll need to reorganize the ceremony for 5 o'clock in the afternoon. David, go inform all the guests that the wedding will take place, but with a modified schedule." The machinery of organization was immediately put into motion. Henry ran to talk to the executives, who received the news with professional enthusiasm and personal curiosity. Father Thomas began to calculate times for the modified ceremony. The guests began to receive the information that there would be a wedding just later than planned. And I sat on my porch watching as my farm became the setting for a wedding that would finally take place on my terms, with my rules, and with the public recognition that this property had a name and a last name. Hilda Morales. But the best part was yet to come. The part where all the guests would know the complete story of how a 70-year-old grandmother taught her son and daughter-in-law that respect is not negotiable, that consideration is not optional, and that mothers also have dignity. The best part was the toast I was mentally preparing, the speech that would be remembered for decades in all future family gatherings. At 5:30 in the afternoon, my farm was transformed into something I had never imagined. The executives had kept their word and finished their event on time, but most of them had stayed as special guests, fascinated by the idea of witnessing a family wedding after their business meeting. It was like having 2 events in one, and the mix of corporate elegance with family drama created a unique atmosphere. Jessica looked beautiful despite all the stress of the day. Her wedding dress, although a little dirty from her desperate running, was still spectacular under the golden light of the sunset. David had managed to fix his hair and straighten his tie, regaining some of the elegance a groom is supposed to have on his big day. The 200 guests were finally seated, although in a completely different configuration than originally planned. The corporate chairs were mixed with the wedding chairs, creating an improvised but functional arrangement. The altar was set up under my favorite mango tree, the same tree I had planted with my own hands 3 years ago. Father Thomas, with that adaptability that priests develop after decades of unexpected ceremonies, had managed to create a solemn and beautiful atmosphere despite the extraordinary circumstances. His voice resonated clear and strong as he read the marriage vows that would unite my son and daughter-in-law for a lifetime. But while I listened to the promises of eternal love, I was focused on the moment that would come after the toast. The moment when the whole family, all the friends, all the guests would know the complete story of how we had gotten here. When Father Thomas pronounced the final words, "You may kiss as husband and wife," the applause was deafening. 200 people celebrating triumphant love. Corporate executives mingling with emotional family members. An explosion of joy that filled my garden with a wonderful energy. Henry then approached with a glass of champagne in his hand and a wireless microphone. "Mrs. Morales, it's time for your toast as hostess." My heart began to beat faster. This was the moment I had been waiting for, the moment of absolute truth. I slowly got up, took the microphone with hands that no longer trembled, and walked to the center where everyone could see me perfectly. The silence gradually spread until 200 people were looking at me with expectation, waiting for the emotional words that the groom's mother typically says in these moments. "Good evening, everyone." I began with a voice that sounded stronger and more confident than it had ever sounded. "I'm Hilda Morales, David's mother and the owner of this beautiful farm where we are celebrating today." The applause was immediate and warm. So far, everything sounded completely normal. "I want to thank you all for joining us on this very special day, although I must confess that I found out there would be a wedding here in the exact same way you did, by invitation." A murmur of confusion began to spread among the guests. Some people looked at each other without completely understanding what I had said. "You see, my son and my daughter-in-law sent out 200 invitations with my farm's address without consulting me if I agreed to have a wedding here." The murmur turned into an absolute silence. All eyes alternated between the bride and groom, who had faces red with shame, and me, who continued to speak with unshakable serenity. I found out on Tuesday morning when the florist called to coordinate the decorations. Imagine my surprise to discover that my property had been committed for an event I didn't know existed. The corporate executives who had witnessed all the afternoon's drama began to smile with admiration. They recognized a businesswoman defending her rights. For 40 years, I worked as a housekeeper to buy this farm. 40 years cleaning other people's houses, saving penny after penny, dreaming of having a place of my own where I could live with dignity in my golden years. My voice cracked slightly, but I continued. "And for the 5 years I have lived here, I have been treated as a housekeeper on my own property." The silence was so profound, you could hear the wind moving the leaves on the trees. No one expected this kind of speech at a wedding, but everyone was completely captivated by the story unfolding in front of their eyes. When I found out what had happened, I made a decision. I rented my farm for a corporate event on the same day as the wedding to teach my son and daughter-in-law that this property has an owner, and that owner is me. Several guests began to nod in approval. The story was starting to make sense to everyone. But at the end of the day, family love is stronger than hurt pride. And although it was necessary to go to this extreme to get the respect I deserve, here we are celebrating David and Jessica's love in my house on my terms with my rules. The applause that followed was different from the previous one. It was an applause of admiration, of recognition, of genuine respect for a woman who had defended her dignity. So I toast to the bride and groom who today learned that respect for parents is not optional, that consideration for others is fundamental, and that mothers also have rights and feelings. I raised my champagne glass, and the whole crowd did the same. To David and Jessica, may they begin their marriage by understanding the value of mutual respect. The applause that followed was thunderous. 200 people celebrating not only a wedding, but a life lesson masterfully imparted. The corporate executives applauded with professional admiration. The older family members nodded in approval. Even the young friends seemed to understand that they had witnessed something extraordinary. David then approached with tears in his eyes and hugged me in front of the whole crowd. "I'm sorry, Mom," he whispered in my ear. "Sorry it took us so long to understand." Jessica came after, her wedding dress dirty and her tears of shame mixed with tears of gratitude. "Thank you for saving the wedding despite everything, Hilda. We will never forget this lesson." The rest of the celebration was magical. The guests constantly came up to congratulate me, not only on my son's wedding, but on the way I had handled the situation. "What a brave woman," Melissa's Italian grandmother said to me. "I wish more mothers had your character." David's uncle commented, "The corporate executives integrated perfectly into the family party, exchanging business cards and talking about future events on my farm." Henry sought me out before he left. "Mrs. Morales, after what I witnessed today, I want to offer you an exclusive contract. Your farm and your personality are exactly what our most demanding clients are looking for." When everyone was gone and I was left alone, cleaning up the last details, I sat on my porch and looked at the stars beginning to appear in the night sky. In my hands, I held two things I hadn't had when I woke up that morning: a contract to turn my farm into a prosperous business and the absolute respect of my family. But the most important thing I had was something that could not be touched or measured. The certainty that I would never again allow anyone, not even my own son, to treat me as less than I am. The certainty that Hilda Morales was not just the self-sacrificing mother, not just the complacent grandmother, not just the family's housekeeper. Hilda Morales was the owner of her own destiny, the lady of her own house, the author of her own story. And that story had just begun, the most beautiful chapter of all. The chapter where I finally respected myself enough to demand that others respect me too. At 70 years old, I had learned the most important lesson of my life: that love without respect is not true love, and that teaching respect, even if it is painful, is the greatest gift a mother can give her children. 6 months have passed since the most talked about wedding in town, and my life has changed in ways I never imagined. Every morning, I wake up on my farm with a feeling I didn't know before. The feeling of being completely in control of my own existence. The events business has flourished beyond my wildest dreams. Henry kept his promise, and my farm has become the most exclusive place in the region for elegant weddings and corporate meetings. Every weekend I receive between $3,000 and $5,000 for renting my property. Money that has given me a financial independence I never had. Not even when I was working double shifts as a housekeeper. But the most beautiful thing is not the money. The most beautiful thing is the respect. David and Jessica have religiously kept their promise. Every month they deposit the $1,000 in rent on time, and they have never, not once, shown up without consulting me first. When they want to use the farm for a family celebration, they call me weeks in advance, politely ask if the date is available, and wait for my answer without taking anything for granted. The first time they did it, 4 months ago, I almost cried with emotion. David called me one Thursday afternoon. "Mom, could you check your calendar? We want to celebrate Jessica's birthday at the farm next Saturday, if that's okay with you. And if you don't have other plans, if that's okay with you." Words I had waited 5 years to hear. But the most profound change has been in the way they treat me when they are here. I am no longer the housekeeper who prepares food and cleans up after parties. Now, I am the respected hostess, the owner of the house, who sits at the head of the table while they take care of serving and cleaning. The first time Jessica insisted on washing the dishes after a family dinner, I was so surprised I didn't know what to do. "Hilda, you worked enough preparing this delicious meal. We'll take care of the cleanup." It was like living in a parallel world where I was finally treated as the matriarch I always should have been. The grandchildren, of course, still come to visit me. Jessica never carried out her threat to keep them away from me. And now I understand why. The children need their grandmother as much as I need them. But even the relationship with them has improved because now they see me as the powerful grandmother who demanded respect, not as the submissive grandmother who always gave in to everything. The whole town knows my story. For months, I was the topic of conversation at the market, at church, everywhere. Some women would seek me out to tell me their own stories of family disrespect. Hilda, how did you find the courage to stand up for yourself? Irene would ask me every time we met. My answer is always the same. I didn't find the courage. I built it day by day every time I decided I deserved something better. And it's true. It wasn't a moment of sudden bravery. It was years of accumulated humiliations, until I finally said enough. I have received 3 marriage proposals from widowers in town who were impressed with my strong character and financial independence. I politely thanked them but explained that at 70 years old I finally learned to be happy with myself, and I wouldn't trade that happiness for anything. My farm has become a symbol in town. Young women come to see me to ask for advice on how to set boundaries with their families. Older mothers tell me how they used my story to teach their adult children respect. Even Father Thomas mentions my case in his sermons about the honor we owe our parents. Henry's corporate event business has become a prosperous partnership. I now have events scheduled until the end of the year, and the waiting list to rent my farm is 3 months long. Major companies, wealthy families, even regional celebrities have discovered this little paradise I built with 40 years of sweat and tears. But every night when the guests leave and the lights go out, I sit on my porch with a cup of coffee and look at the stars with a satisfaction I didn't know before. It's not just the satisfaction of money earned or respect conquered. It's the profound satisfaction of knowing that I am finally who I always should have been. I am no longer Hilda, the housekeeper. I am no longer Hilda, the self-sacrificing mother who suffers in silence. I am no longer Hilda, the compliant grandmother who accepts anything to avoid conflict. Now I am Hilda Morales, a successful businesswoman, a respected matriarch, a woman who stood up for herself when it seemed too late to change things. Hilda, who taught her children that true love includes respect and that respect is not begged for, it is demanded. And every night before I fall asleep, I whisper a small prayer of thanks, not for the wedding that almost got canceled, not for the conflict that almost destroyed the family, but for having had the courage at 70 years old to write the end of my own story instead of letting others write it for me. Because it is never too late to start respecting yourself. And it is never too late to teach others how they should treat us. This is my story. This is my victory. This is my life, finally lived on my own terms.